Hey everybody, welcome to the Basics of Digital Painting. I'm Pete Moorbacher. Every week I give out a prompt for you guys to try out, to learn on, and then the next week we go over the homework and we review how you did with it. And last week I gave out an imaginative assignment instead of doing a study. So the idea of this was that I gave you a example of my own work and I gave you a brief that I was working from for an item illustration that I was doing for my game. And I let everybody take a swing at it and see how they did. And then we're going to talk about, oh, what the experience was like, we ran into trouble, anything like, and then it should be a fertile ground for us all learning from each other. And hopefully I've got some insightful things to say. I've got some of these pulled up, but first things first, we're going to go over next week's homework. I have a reference image pulled up here already. We have this very handsome looking, he looks Italian, looks like an Italian guy. He might be an actor. And I don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me. So what I want you to do this week is I want you to do a study of this piece, but I want you to do it in your style. I want you to think about what are the emblematic aspects of your style in particular, and I want you to make it the most in your style as you can, based on how you see that. And it should be an interesting topic for us to talk about, what choices you made and why you think that represents your way of working. And I'm curious to see all the different ways in which people see themselves in their style. So it's a really easy subject for this week's study. So the challenge on that is a little lower, but we're going to be getting a little existential next week because that's where I like to go. So I've got that there. I'm just going to upload it over to the homework channel really, really quick, and then we're going to get right into the feedback. All right. Okay. Right. So I have Flo's picked out first, but Flo's not here yet. If Flo doesn't join us, I'll probably go do them last. First up, we got Nano Boy. I think Nano Boy, I was looking at your stuff last week, but I was so slow in getting to it that you had to run off to work. Was that correct?
Yeah, it was just just when I had to leave.
I'm so sorry about that. So I figured I'd push you up to the front if you got a hard out. Push you up to the front of the queue here. You said strayed a bit from the design language probably, but couldn't shake the idea of head of brass equals brass instrument. I thought about rendering the polished metal would be easier, but it's deceptively tricky. Aha, you've pushed two buttons there. But first things first, I'm going to ask you what your experience with the assignment was like.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I like actually having a defined set of things to kind of check off while I'm thinking about the design.
Mm-hmm.
And I did actually come up with a couple of designs, but then when I was rendering, because I got a little bit tricked up in the more complicated designs having to follow the reflection rules of polished metal,
Mm-hmm.
I ended up kind of giving up a bit and sticking with the kind of simpler design. So this is the one that ended up getting the final kind of render and polish, pun intended. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it.
Before I bring up the two points that I have feedback on, I'm curious, what parts do you feel good about? What parts do you feel less good about?
I actually had no expectation of this, but when I made the jewel,
Mm-hmm.
I liked how that ended up looking. I kind of had some messy flame parts, and then I added over the reflection of the kind of facets of the jewel,
Mm-hmm.
and I liked how that ended up coming out.
Oh yeah, it came out great.
And then if I look kind of far away from it, I do like the way that the darkness of the background is reflected in the metal.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there were a couple things where I didn't go in thinking I had a lot of experience doing, but then ended up looking pretty decent.
Yeah, I think it came out really good. So one of the points I wanted to touch on was that you said you couldn't shake the idea that brass equals brass instrument. And it's that kind of totally irrational association that has been the groundwork for most of my design choices. And so I wanted to call that out as a positive thing. I think that a natural impulse people have is that they go, well, my association with this is brass instruments, but that's not the right thing, so I'm not going to do it. And then they leave behind all the ideas that are authentically theirs in hopes that they'll figure out what the idea is that's the correct idea, which is not how any of this works. Like we don't get to choose what our ideas are, but we do get to, do get to approve them or deny them. And so it's a big part of me trying to teach people design that I'm always trying to convince them to do what you did here, which is to take those irrational associations and put them on the page and then judge them. Like if you put it down and you said, I think that using a shape language from brass instruments is totally wrong on this. Well, you would know after you drew it. But like you didn't pre-edit yourself. And I think that is a really good instinct, and I want you to keep up with that. The other thing that you brought up was that you said you thought rendering polished metal would be easier, but it's deceptively tricky. You are very, very right on this. Let's go to the reference material. I'm just going to go to Pinterest really quick and pull up brass instrument, maybe? Let's see what we got on Pinterest.
Yeah, I was looking up like trumpet specifically when I was doing it.
Yeah, okay, so the rules for metal, let's see, a lot of brass is a little bit, it's a little bit hazy looking. It's not quite as shiny as some other metals. In some cases, we get, this very polished look. And when it comes to metallic surfaces, I have a few rules for myself that I want to pass along to people. This is a really good example of it here. Let me just bring this in so that we can look at it inside your file. Okay, so when it comes to any kind of reflective metallic surface, the rules for how things get lit kind of go out the window. We kind of have to start over from our basic understanding. And this is a critique that I think might be relevant for a lot of the people who did the homework this week, because this is just like a big struggling point for a lot of people. So because you had it in your comment, I decided to attach it to your piece. Hope you don't mind. Okay,
Perfect,
so when we think of like lighting, we often think of something like this, right? We got a light that's coming in from the upper left. And so, hey, look, our highlight is on the upper left and our shadow is on the lower right. Really straightforward. And yet that is like, when it comes to doing metallic stuff, that's wrong. It doesn't work like that when it's made of shiny metal. And so we want to think like, okay, well, shininess means that it's got a big highlight. So then we're going to make that part brighter. And it's like, from some respects, kind of, yes. But like what really is happening when something is shiny, and you can see it in this photo, is that is not really, we don't really see the lighting direction on the surface of the object. What we see is like a mirror, and the mirror reflection of the environment. And so instead of doing it like this, what we have to do instead is we have to stand back and think, what direction is the light coming from? Well, let's say it's the upper left, but what shape is the light? Is it a square like diffuser light? Because that's going to leave a shape like this. Or is it the sun? And we're going to see a little pinpoint light like this. What are we going to see? Are we going to be in a room like with a bunch of lights all over the ceiling? Because they're going to end up stretching out at the edges, and then there's maybe going to be one closer to the middle. And so we're going to actually see a reflection of the pinpoints of the lights. And then, like, if this is outside, we might see the reflection of the ground is going to be like this, because the ground is going to be darker than the sky. And then we're going to see a reflection of the sky maybe above it like this. And so we're actually going to be seeing, if the light is off to the left, it doesn't really matter that doesn't matter as much. If it's a soft, smoky, like metallic, it might get a mixture of the two, where you get like the reflection, but you also get a little bit of that diffuse lighting as well. And so the two kind of mix together. And you can see how that ends up looking pretty shiny. So one of the key things, the key shortcuts that I always do whenever I'm trying to make something shiny is I just put a dark spot wherever the light's coming from. Because even though the light might be coming from there, that means that we'll get a specular reflection, but it doesn't mean we're going to get a highlight. One of the things that you can do to make something look really shiny is reflect darkness with it. If you can clearly show there's a lot of light hitting the object, but you make it really dark, it's going to look really shiny. Like, look at this ball already. Like, I haven't really done anything to it, but you can tell it's shiny as hell because it's like all the light is like concentrated in this pinpoint highlight. We can see there's a really big light hitting it, and yet it's not getting brighter. And that shows us it's reflective. So is a shortcut for making reflectivity. We can make things look dark. And the darker you make everything besides the highlight, the more you're going to end up with this kind of shiny effect. To apply this to your piece, you might want to take one of your darker orange colors, because this is brass, and fill in some of this area, especially on like the reverse side here. You want to have that highlight not running right along the edge, but somewhere in the middle. And that highlight is not going to represent like the area where a lot of light is hitting. It's going to be representing a reflection of the source of light itself. And so we need to consider the way in which it's only going to be hitting kind of one direction on the tube here. And so as the tube turns, we might only see it like running along one portion. So if the light's a little bit further to the left, we might only see it here. If it's a little bit further up, we might see it up here. If you have like a reflective object and you turn it over in your hands, you'll watch the highlight kind of crawl along its surface as it hits along different facets in an odd direction. So it would be a pretty big repaint to try to get that brass material. But the main thing you need to do is you need to like fully forget how you do matte materials and then like remap this other form of thinking on it. It's one of these challenges that you have to really overcome for imaginative painting, is that there's like a few different sort of material languages that you all need to be fluent in order to be able to do like, hey, this thing needs to be made out of wood. This is going to be cloth. This thing's going to be shiny metal. Like I need to be able to like summon these different kind of shaders at will to be able to depict a variety of different things. And when I was giving everybody like a shiny brass crown, I knew I was going to be messing with a lot of you. So I was hoping that this would be an opportunity to talk about this subject. So any thoughts before I move on to the next person?
No, that was pretty much spot on. I think also like having a few more lighting references would have been helpful.
Yeah, the lighting references is tough because you have a really complex shape here. It's like if the crown is going to be round, but then also rounded, then, and then you have like tubes coming up in different directions. You're never going to get a lighting reference that's going to encompass all of it. So it's going to be beholden on you to find a photo of an object that is the right kind of material you're imagining, that has enough lighting on it to give you a sense on how to apply that logic to your own piece. And you can see, looking at this bell here, I think that we have a pretty good picture of what I'm talking about. You can actually see the window in the reflection of the bell, and then you can see that this highlight running up the handle is actually just a mirror reflection of the window here, and that the lighter portions that we're seeing are actually just reflections of the lighter portion of the room. And so it's entirely, a lot of what we're seeing here is based off of the sort of mirror reflection of the room in a kind of funhouse mirror distorted way. And then as the surface gets rougher, then we start getting some of those same properties of these matte materials mixed back in. And it really depends on the kind of material you're going for. There's not a universally correct way of doing this. Even within this very narrow subject matter, you can see that there's actually quite a few options. And so it's really up to you as the artist to make a distinct choice on what material you want and like what's the right vibe for what you're going for. You can see here, this is like a really shiny version. You can almost make out objects in it. It's so shiny. And it leaves a very distinct pattern because all of those different objects, as they get distorted, turn into these like tall bands. If you had any objects being reflected in here, you would probably see these kinds of long bands of color as a result of them being sort of twisted and stretched out. And it would kind of go back and forth in some cases between like lighter and darker. If there was fire underneath it, you might see like stretches of fire going across the bottom of it. And there's not going to be a distinctly right answer the same way like when you get a matte material just right, it like clicks and you go, oh, this is all logically correct. Reflections are requiring you to either have like a supercomputer for a brain or you're going to be BSing your way through it. So it's going to be a lot of BSing your way through it.
BSing it is.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thanks, Nano Boy. I'm glad I could catch you this week.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Moving along. Let's see. Flo's still on here, so we're going to skip. Jade. Jade's here, right? Jade's here. Hello, Jade. As Jade comes on stage, I'm going to read out the comment.
Hi.
Not really good at concept or rendering. It was a huge challenge for me, but I'm glad I finished it. I'll probably wake up tomorrow and see all the mistakes. Did you?
Yeah. I already started to see it. Oh my god. So many part and finished or that make no sense.
I
You
think
can see I have panicked sometimes.
one of my sort of broad comments about people on this challenge is that everyone who said they were bad at concepts, I really like their concepts.
Oh, thank you.
And so I wouldn't take that self-criticism about your ideas to be too serious. It's just like, I think that it's just natural. Like if you are putting your ideas into a piece, that you're just going to feel like they're bad ideas. And that's just the way that it feels most times. And so you can just like ignore that kind of self-criticism because it's unlikely to go away and it's unlikely to be true. So you have to find other ways of judging whether or not your concepts are any good. And, you know, you can look to the reactions of other people, or you can sort of look at it from an objective perspective. Like, does this include all of the ideas that I wanted to put in there? Does it fulfill what the brief was asking for? And then once you say yes to those things, you say, that's as good as it gets. I think that's it. And that's design. Design is permanently unfinished. It's always unsatisfying. And but it's also, I think, a very interesting problem to solve because it requires you to work along a different metric than with rendering. But you also said you're not good at rendering. I don't believe you on that either. I think this looks very nice. Tell me a little bit about your experience working on it.
Well, first, what you just said is really reassuring. I've started the concept, you saw the rough one, I think, and then I sent it to Sean. And I was like, oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing, but what do you think? And just because he liked it, I thought, okay, maybe I'm too rough on myself.
Right.
I tried to push it. And he said, yeah, push it. And I said, I'm bad at rendering. He said, no, push it. And I said, okay. And I've done my best, I think, because
Yes.
it was the first time. And
I noticed you and Sean both credited each other on getting some feedback. I selected both of your pieces today in part for that reason. So are you like, do you stay in touch regularly, or are you just like communicating inside the community space here?
It was the third time we exchanged artwork.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him for advice, and he asked me for advice in 3D. So,
It's good.
yay!
Yeah. Having other artists to talk to about your work can be really helpful if you understand what the other person's going for. I think a lot of times I see people reach out for advice and generally, if they're like, anybody, tell me what I'm doing wrong, there'll be someone who'll pop their head up and say, here's all the things I think you should do different. In those cases, the feedback is usually not as helpful. But when you reach out to somebody, you have a good conversation with them, you feel like they understand what you want. And like, maybe they like things about your own work that you don't feel confident in. Like that kind of interaction can be really valuable. And so I'm very happy to hear that you guys are communicating. And I agree.
Yeah.
I see this concept and I think this is a good idea. This is a bigger and bolder concept than I did for my own piece. I actually save this to my reference folder as a reminder to myself that like this kind of like wheels covered in eyes motif that's very popular with angel stuff is a really good thing to mine as a design element for these kinds of items and character designs that I'm doing. And so I thought, oh, you're making an angel crown and you've pulled in this like biblically accurate angel motif. It's a good idea. I think the way you've arranged it is very nice. And so I've while I don't want to copy this piece exactly, I think that using this like multiple wheels around the head is a really good idea on its surface. And so it's hard once you've got an idea that's solid like that. It's kind of hard to screw it up.
Yeah. I see. I'm honored. Didn't expect that. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I mean when it comes to concept stuff, like the idea of it itself is like ultimately what's the most important, and then the way that the idea is expressed is just a matter of how well do we communicate our ideas to somebody else. Like, someone might look at this and go, "Oh, leather straps," and you'd be like, it's supposed to be brass. And you'd be, oh, I didn't do a good job on the metal, and like. But like so that there is a certain amount of room to be able to like get better in terms of communicating the specifics about the materials and make sure that the vibe of what you're going for comes across clearly. But that I think is actually like a less important part when it comes to something like concept art or even like a really concept focused illustration like this. One of the things I also think you did good is you started off with the figure very bright and you darkened it up quite a bit and to bring focus to the crown itself. And I think that
big up to Sean. Let's see. He told me that the crown was better if the background was dark because before it was just all light. And then I thought, yeah, the character too. So let's go. And that's why his opinion was really important. I think it would turn really not really as nice as now.
That's excellent.
If you haven't told me,
you got good feedback, and then you understood what was good about it and took it further. That's exactly what you need to do in order to keep making things better. What do you wish you had? I mean, now that I've praised you a bunch on this, what do you wish you could have done better with this?
Well, you just explained how to make something look shiny, and I see, oh my god, I just put random colors and stuff like it's a milk pot. You don't know what you're looking at or where is the light.
Yeah.
I know I need to work on more reference.
Your material is better here. I think that your material here, you've come closer to getting it right because you have these kind of random bands of light and dark, and you can really fake it by doing that. But one of my recommendations that I made in the last one is true here too, which is that if you really want to make sure that you're like pushing that, just go ahead and put something really dark right where the highlight's supposed to be. And that will really help sell that concept of it being reflections and not like a matte material. So, this is sometimes one of the best ways to do it is to just find the facets that are facing towards the lighting and just make them all dark. And you can see like on this point here, you have a kind of a highlight hitting both sides.
Yeah.
My recommendation when it comes to shiny stuff is you kind of just have it hit neither. and then you have the highlight run up the edge, and that'll always end up giving you a slightly better result. It's same thing with these. You were working symmetrically, it looks like, and so you've copied over, and it leaves you with this lighting that's kind of not clear what direction it's coming from. So I think that the more custom painting that you did on the bands ends up reading better than on the crown. But if you're going to, it might only take a little bit of additional painting, just a few brush strokes to make it asymmetrical. So even if you're going to copy it over, I've done this. You copy it over and then you do a little bit of paint on like one side, and you can get a little bit better result really quickly.
Oh, makes sense. It looks so much better already.
Great. I'm glad you think so. Any questions for me before I let you go?
No, thank you so much. That was really instructive.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thanks for participating, Jade. It's great to see your work.
Yay.
All right. Let's see. Flo's down here. I don't think Flo's going to show up. Flo's going to go to the end. Oh, I'm going to screw something up. All right. Next up, we got Dustbot. Dustin. We have your paint over.
Yo.
Hello. I've got your paint over here. Like, this has become a tradition now. We look at least one speed paint on double the paint. Are you all using the same... Are y'all using the same title cards? I always see these title cards at the beginning of these.
I think it's because we're all using DaVinci because it's free, the free editing software, but
Okay.
it's still pretty powerful. And it's just the stuff
I
that
am
comes
also
in it.
using DaVinci. Yeah. All right. So you started off with a drawing here. You had a... Oh, let me just get at the beginning of this one again. You had
I've got
you
a
started off
5,000%
with
speed.
was it a pencil drawing?
Yeah, I had a pencil drawing of the crown that I liked after I did a couple of concepts in
Mhm.
my sketchbook, and then I put a scarf over my head so I could get that cloth dynamic around the
I thought
skull.
you'd maybe pulled a photo from online, so you're doing extra hard work on it.
Yeah, I didn't want to use somebody else's photo. I figured it's better if I just use my own photo.
I got to tell you, in the world of like working in Hollywood, most concept artists just use photos they find online.
Yeah, fair enough.
In the world of
That's legit.
illustration, it's looked down on a little bit, but like in concept art, it is the standard. So
Okay. Cool.
it's not entirely okay. So you're getting into the rendering on the crystal right away. I just started doing one with a big crystal in it, and I just got a really good crystal reference. So we're gonna look at that alongside yours a little bit here. Let me
Oh,
just-
nice. Yeah,
just
I
pull it
was looking at a reference of an uncut diamond being lit from the inside.
Aha. Yeah, so
While
I got
I
this
was
crystal that is like has a sunset going through it, and I have some notes about that in relation to your
Okay.
thing that we're going to take a look at towards the end. But yeah, crystal is another one of those materials. I was saying, hey, there's a few different materials that have like very different rules from each other. In that, three of them are metal, crystal, and fire. So, so we
All
have
three
like
things
lots
I
of
use.
fodder to talk over material painting this week, which is something I've honestly thought about writing a class on. Not that I'm the greatest material painter of all time. It's just one of those things. I don't think that there's like as much dedicated instruction on it. It's because everything's just sort of presumed to be a matte material, and that I noticed that it just, unless you're doing your own imaginative work and giving yourself these like extra challenges, it doesn't come up very much.
Just hearing you talk about the reflective metal early on was like, oh man, why does this stuff never come up in art school?
It's, I don't know. There are courses out there for it. I mean, there's courses for everything. But okay, so you're putting a ton. So you've got this like broad layout for. I'm sort of skipping over what you're doing here. You've got this broad layout for all of your values and colors, and then you are carving like surface detail into it. And this is really similar to the work method that I have, and like what we've talked about a lot in the studies. But because we have these like big material challenges, I feel like you haven't quite solved for the material of the crystal or the metal or the fire prior to trying to go in and do really tight surface detail on all of it. And it looks like you're having a bit of a bad time, like just feeling frustrated?
I was actually kind of enjoying it.
Okay.
I was going for something akin to like hammered brass buttons.
Yes. Yeah, I
Uh,
can spot that when I get up close, and I think it's a really cool material. But the
Gotcha.
shininess of it, or the reflectivity of it, I don't feel like it's necessarily showing up. And then you've got
Okay.
the fire here too, using some custom brushes, some soft brushes there to get some smokiness in there.
Yeah, it's a collection of cloud brushes that I like to use
Aha.
for various effects.
Cool. Well, I've already talked about brass a little bit. The next up is I'm going to go over crystal really fast, and then let's see. Am I going to use your example as fire, or well, no. Well, I'll beat Sean up about his fire. We'll talk about crystal with yours. All right. I'm sure you have a crystal reference that's different than mine, so I'm not going to say that this is like the end all be all of crystal references here. But the things I wanted to point out about it, you have, I think, some aspects of it correct. But crystal is one of the ones that has absolutely given me like some of the hardest time in my career as an artist. And I've watched artists on Magic the Gathering screw it up over and over again. And it's just been like a fascination of mine. I don't want to be rude and pull up any specific examples, but one of the things that makes crystal difficult is that it's not, we were talking about brass is reflective. Crystal is refractive. Sorry for the non-English speakers out there. This might be difficult. The refraction is like the property of light passing through the crystal and bouncing around and coming out at odd angles. And so this is like what happens inside of a prism. So you have like a light beam that's coming from behind here, and that is like going through and bouncing out like a different random direction. And so like refraction causes the direction of the light beams to diverge. So you'll have something lit from behind, and that will cause a facet over on like a different part of it to like light up. And it makes it really, really difficult to predict exactly what something's going to look like when it's inside of a crystal, because what's going to happen is you're going to see, we all recognize these different facets, right? And some of them end up being kind of light and some of them end up being kind of dark. And that's sort of the broad strokes of it. So you are getting that to a degree, but inside this crystal reference, you can see that there is, we end up with these kind of, inside each facet is its own little composition. Like, it's not just that this one is light, it's that it's like, it's sort of light through the middle, and it's got like a dark tip. What it is it's like a little window into a different part of this photograph. Each different facet represents a kind of, hall of mirrors reflecting in a different direction that's going to show a different thing that's behind the crystal. And you can see that, like, even though the table is running this diagonal, the reflection of the light in this facet is actually running the counter direction. And it's I've never been able to really wrap my head around exactly how to like kind of calculate this out. And you can see like that we're getting some angles over here that are running this way. So the main thing that we can really do is look for a reference that has sort of a rough idea of it, break things down by facet, and try to be a little random with it. We can presume that the area behind the crown might be darker in spots. And so what we might want to do is find some facets that look like they should be getting light and make them objectively too dark, especially if... and then the other thing we're noticing here is we're getting different hues inside each of these facets. So this is actually, I think, a reflection that's kind of reflective. This is actually reflection of like at a glancing angle, crystal will sometimes like get a highlight. And so there's a difference between this light back here is light passing through and bouncing out at an odd angle, while this one is the light bouncing off the surface. So we're seeing a bounce here, and then we're seeing like a twist inside here. And they both come off as light, but they are being lit differently. And thankfully, in this lighting situation, we actually have two different color temperatures that are like distinguishing between areas where the light is bouncing off versus the place where the light is passing through. And so finding two different hues to represent reflection and refraction might be a really good bet for making it look more like crystal and less like, I don't know, to not make it not look like metal or make it not look like it's a matte material. When you have a lot of jagged facets, you can end up with like a really odd pattern of lights and darks kind of crossing into each other. And I find that the only way I can get to check to see if it feels like this is coming together right is to look over at the navigator and see whether or not it starts to feel more or less like crystal. But the main critique I have of yours is that we go from like a fairly light orange to a brighter orange, but we don't get any kind of hue shifts, and we don't see any reflections of the darker parts. Like even if we were to just be like, we have this darker base here, somewhere in there, we're going to see a reflection on like a rear facet of that base. And so somewhere in here, we're going to see like some little triangle or something. And that's actually going to be a reflection of this bottom part. The light's going to be coming in from our eye and then bouncing downwards and like looking inside there. So anywhere that we see anything around it is going to be like, we're going to be like seeing, like a mirror reflection, but not facing the right way. One of the things that's so frustrating about crystal sometimes is that you'll sometimes see like, you're seeing stuff sort of refracting through the front, but sometimes you're also seeing rear facing facets. And then it also, in this example, it gets really cloudy towards the bottom. And so we start losing that refraction and we start getting this kind of diffusion where it's just saying, oh, there's a lot of light. And so it's all getting just kind of soft and light all around. That kind of like mixture of clear parts and cloudy parts is another thing that can be added. And I got to tell you, I've done crystals a bunch of times, and every time I line myself up to do one, I start to get a little nervous because it turns into a lot of me like looking over my navigator, trying to figure out where it doesn't look right, picking a facet, changing its values, looking back over there, thinking that I'm an idiot, and just going back and forth until I finally balance something out that feels about right. If you can find
a statue carved out of amethyst for one of my graduate projects, and that was like the longest nightmare I've ever had.
It is one of the, I think reflective crystal is like one of the most challenging possible materials to paint, just because like the pattern of light on the inside of it is so deeply unpredictable. And then we have like these lighter parts here, these cloudy parts here, in some cases are capturing a lot of light. And so you can kind of make like either capturing like patterns of faults through the middle of it to make some of these like little galaxies and floating strips through the middle of it, or you can also have some surface scratches and whatnot. And for some reason, it ends up looking like crystal at a distance because it seems like everything is all about these little subtleties. Like, okay, well, yeah, surface scratches, little bits of cloudiness, slight differentiations of patterns in individual facets. Like, how would you even be able to tell that looks like crystal at a distance when we're talking about just a few pixels here and there? And yet something about it tends to always add up. I think it has to do with the way in which these different little looks inside the crystal tend to meet at odd angles and tend to have a kind of unpredictable pattern of where there's areas of contrast. Like,
awesome.
If you mess with it for several hours, eventually you start to feel like you're getting it right. Then it's one of these horrible moments. You stand up, you walk away, you come back, and it looks terrible. And you're like, oh my God, I've just spent like 5 hours on this. Why does it still not look right? But the upshot of it is the next time you go to paint a crystal, you're going to be like, oh, I feel like I'm actually getting it. Like it takes a long time to kind of download how to render this material, but after you've done it like 3 or 4 times, it will start to click and you will start to feel stronger about it. I guarantee it.
Well, good, because I am going to revisit that amethyst statue. It's part of a world project, a building project.
I have confidence. I have
Good
confidence.
practice.
It get a lot of comparative reference. Find a lot of different references of amethysts under different lighting conditions, carved into different shapes. Just try to like grind away at it. Do your best to get a really good download on it. And then when you feel like it's impossible, stick with it a little longer and then do more repetitions after that. Like it's going to require you to, every time I've had learned a really challenging material, it's always taken me 3 or 4 attempts of attempting to do it from reference that it like finally starts to click. And I finally feel like I have access to that as a thing going forwards. But yeah, crystal's one of the hard ones. So good luck with your amethyst. Any questions for me while I've still got you here?
No, pretty solid. I appreciate the feedback. I'm glad to hear some feedback on one of these pieces.
All right. Thanks for participating, Dustin.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. We've got Aberth. Hey
Hi,
there.
Pete. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
So, we've had an ongoing dialogue looking at your work. You have been learning how to paint from reference, and this is one of the first times I've seen you paint from imagination. And so rather than get really hyper specific like I have with some of the other people we were talking to today, I want to hear a little bit more about your experience of like sort of venturing into unknown territory.
Yeah, so I I had never sort of painted fire before, so I did a few sketches of different fire, and I was sort of attracted to sort of more like drawings of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I sort of had the idea, I should have a crown, and then maybe I'll draw some sort of more cartoony fire on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like that sketch, but I was like, I've done it flat. So I thought maybe I'll bring it into Blender, and I wrapped it around the cylinder to try to get it into 3D.
Interesting.
And then I brought that back into Photoshop and then continued from there. But then I realized as I sort of had gotten into putting in the color and painting it up, that I hadn't really made a lot of choices. Like I didn't know how this thing really fit together in 3 dimensions. I didn't know whether the fire was like flame or was it some other material that had been bent into the shape of fire. And I just had all these like questions that there are no answers to them. Whereas when reference, I always can look at the reference photo
you
closer.
always have the picture of the puzzle on the box,
Yeah, and so then I got to this point where like I don't know what to do. I don't know what the answer is. I tried to sort of make some things up, but then I realized that the ideas weren't consistent with each other. They didn't fit together, and I sort of got kind of frustrated and stopped.
Yeah. Yes, it's a different ball of wax. With the painting from reference, it's like I've always found it's like a little bit relaxing because you always can just sort of default back to like, oh, well, I screwed it up. I'll just do it better from the reference. Just copy the reference better, be better at copying. But then when you push forward with something from imagination, there's a presumption at the beginning that you know what you want. But knowing what you want is actually the big challenge of drawing from imagination. And it's a challenge that is rarely talked about because in all things in our lives, there is a presumption that we all know what we want because we live in this like life of wanting. And we're like, oh, well, we always have our imagination going. We should just use our imagination. But plumbing those depths is like a process unto itself. And I find that the methods of work when it comes to this stuff matter a lot for the results that you get. This work method is unique to me. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think it's a workable one though. I've seen a few entries this week using Blender to help with perspective and to use as an intermediary design tool. And I think that's a really good idea. But I mean specifically about mapping a drawing onto a cylinder as a means of like drawing the thing flat and then wrapping it around. Novel approach. It's creative as a concept, but I think you would be better off having a drawing and then attempting to create a 3D model from that drawing, a simple block in that will help answer some of the questions that you described that you had felt like you hadn't worked out yet. So the goal of the creative process when you're working from imagination is to progressively answer those questions. So the fact that you vocalize them, to me, says that you're already off to a really good start. The thing I would like you to try in the future is to, when you feel like you have those questions in mind, investigate them further and see if you figure out where the best place to explore them is. Because if the question is, how do these flame shapes fit into the band? You could do that by sketching it out in pencil while you're thinking about it. Or you could say, well, I kind of know what I want the silhouette to be, and that'll be my drawing. And how it all fits together, I'm going to figure that out in Blender. And you just push that down the road and you say, in Blender, that's where I figure out what the actual shape of it all is, and I sort of figure out how it all fits together. Different people will have a different order in which they like to solve these steps, and they will also use different tools to solve these steps. So there's the vast number of approaches to working on these kinds of projects, and you'll see it just looking through the thread that we have, the homework thread. There's a huge number of like approaches to how the tools are being used. Personally, I like sticking, putting a lot of those questions up front and working them out in pencil. Some people are want to jump ahead of pencil very quickly because it's sort of imprecise. You worry it at the drawing too much, and you start to tear at your paper. You only get so many bites at the apple when it comes to erasing it. You start to get too dark, and all of a sudden you get these indelible marks that you're fighting. I personally think that when we're talking about drawing, we're talking about thinking on paper. I really like this idea of like making art is not a transcription process. It's a process of thinking. And so I think that thinking on paper with a pencil is one of the easiest ways to transmit your ideas and try to answer your questions without having to like go through a lot of steps or go through a lot of revisions. I think it's a very, very direct process to actually just be using pencil. It also happens to be the cheapest and most accessible possible tool available. So I think the fact that it's both arguably one of the most effective tools and one of the most available tools makes it like a strong contender to just focus more time in it. And then once you have like a lot of those questions answered and you feel like you know really clearly what you want, then the process of bringing it into Photoshop and coloring it, adding color, adding more lighting, things like that are where Photoshop adds a lot of value. And so I would say rather than push those questions all the way to the end when you're working on details, I see people do this a lot. It's easier to take revisions at the beginning, spend more time in consideration up front. And then, once you feel like you really know where you're going, the next steps in Photoshop become very easy. I think some people think that they're having trouble with digital painting or they're having trouble finishing stuff. A very common complaint that I have from mentees is that they have a hard time finishing work. And that's because they get to about this stage and they're not entirely sure why they're not getting the results they want. And they feel as though they're stuck here. But the argument I have is that oftentimes when people feel stuck at the end, it's because those kinds of unresolved questions that you were verbalizing, that those are left unresolved until the point at which the piece is most inflexible, most difficult to edit, and therefore become very intractable. While when you're working on like a loose pencil drawing, like a sketchbook page, they're actually quite easy to investigate and make edits on and stuff. So that's a big download. There's a lot of thoughts. What do you think?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm very familiar with this process from writing, like working with words.
Uh-huh.
I sort of realized at the end that I had gotten to that same point in this like visual way.
Yeah.
Because it was very easy to keep adding color. Oh, I'll make the flames put more colors in here and play with the blending modes and do all this stuff. And I used up a lot of time, but then I had never answered any of those questions. I still didn't know like, how does this thing fit together? What are these purple things? Like what, where is this on a table? Like, what is the environment this thing is in? Like, I never answered any of those questions.
It's a little bit like I always thought that the game Tetris was very elegant in part because it kind of illustrates this process where every once in a while you'll have a odd piece drop that's not the piece that you really want, and so you have to put it someplace inconvenient, and it ends up in your way. But it's a little promise to yourself later. You're like, I'll figure out how to build around this later. And eventually you're supposed to circle back around and get like a nice clean build so you can start, dropping line pieces down the edge. But it's like, we always go through this process of like, well, I'm going to take on a certain amount of debt by pushing these things off. But the question is always, how much debt are we going to put ourselves in? Like, are we going to be having to solve a lot of intractable problems at the end, or are, maybe if for the sake of like thinking through other problems, are we just going to allow this to like perpetuate? What are the purple things? I don't know. We'll figure it out. That's something I do all the time. I will draw something in and I'll go, I don't know what that is. I'll figure it out later. But a big part of the wisdom of like learning this stuff is knowing how much trouble you can leave for later and how much trouble you need to like deal with at the moment. Typically, I find people are not doing enough early on, but the fact that you're just discovering this is a problem, I wouldn't say that you're, having more trouble with it than the average person. It's an interesting new conversation to be having. So I'm glad to see you giving it a shot.
Well, thanks. Thanks for the feedback. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Anything that experiences you had that you had questions about while I've got you here?
I feel like other people did a good job of like, or at least in the discussions of like finding references for different pieces, like different aspects of what they're trying to draw, then combine it.
Yes.
Which I sort of tried to do that. I looked at a bunch of fire, but it wasn't. I feel like the other people had a more specific way of doing that, and I don't know if you have any advice or thoughts about that.
Reference is actually kind of a complex topic. I have a lot of nuanced thoughts on. It's it ultimately comes down to like knowing what you want, because reference doesn't solve one of the core issues of making art, which is that it doesn't serve as a replacement for intention. Like, to be able to make stuff look good, the primary thing you need is to like know what you want. So if you can do something intentionally, you can draw it flat or round, or you can make it stylized or realistic. All solutions are viable so long as they're being done with intention. And so when it comes to reference, if you know exactly the kind of fire that you want, then you have to dig around on the internet to find exactly the right photo that represents that vision. And if you decide to go, well, this is real fire, I'm just going to draw it like this photo that's convenient for me, even though it's not what I was imagining, you're always going to end up with a substandard result. So that you end up with a lot of dissonance. People end up with a lot of dissonance between like what they intend to do and what they ended up doing, because they decide that they're just going to like defer to the reference. And I'm always trying to warn people away from that. It's like you have to, if you can't find the perfect reference, maybe you can try to make it. If you can maybe hack it, but like sometimes you just have to dig and dig and dig, or like go through elaborate steps to shoot it yourself. It can be difficult, because if you just use whatever, you just might as well use an AI, because you're just making whatever at that point. It's our intention to make something a certain way that ultimately makes it our art. And so like every part of that process, from reference gathering to drawing to painting, it all ends up, going back to serve the same need. So when it comes to the practicalities of it, though, I mean, best places to go get reference have changed a lot over the years. I think Pinterest is currently the high point for where people find stuff like this. So if I used to use Google image search. It's gotten progressively worse over the years. There's a lot of really great pictures. Like if it's searching fire on here, there's a very different look between, forest fires versus a match. Fire being pictured during the daytime is always going to appear quite different, because it's primarily photographed in the darkness against a dark background. So getting the right scale, getting the right lighting conditions, figuring out like what you want the vibe to be, it's going to result in wildly different choices overall. So there's like absolutely every reference photo is right, and 99.9% of them are also simultaneously wrong, which means that you don't really get to skip a step with reference. It simply acts as a tool for you to be able to educate yourself sort of midstream while you're in the middle of painting something imaginative. It's like doing a study, but you're only doing only for part of the image, and only using part of the information from the photo. So it's something that would be worth trying out. I would give it a shot, like trying to do something from imagination, and then when you get stuck, see if you can find the perfect image that like helps you get unstuck as far as like fulfilling your intention for the piece. It's something I think takes an amount of like time and nuance. So it's worth giving a shot at. I don't necessarily have a process for it, and I'm trying to think of an assignment I would give to be able to make that happen, and I can't bring one to mind right away. But it'd be an interesting challenge to even craft an assignment that specifically tries to strengthen the muscle of finding and using reference.
I see. But it makes sense that the part that I was struggling with is deciding what I want, which is a earlier step than trying to gather reference of that specific thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, if you don't know what you want, then like there's, you can just pick any photo from the internet and be like, this is what I want now. But it's kind of not what we're doing, right? Like, so, it's an interesting challenge, but I think like if the main thing I would advise for you is I'd keep pushing on that pencil skills. Like I always find that people are better at drawing than they think they are, and they want a shortcut out of it as early as possible because they feel unconfident in their abilities as a drawer. I would just go deeply into the paint, into discomfort when it comes to drawing, and I think it's always going to yield the best results, both in terms of education and like the outcomes on the pieces.
All right, thanks so much, Pete.
All right, thanks, Abworth. All right, so we got Sean. Sean's here, right? Was Sean not here? Sean's here. Put in the image search. Jade is saying put in the image search image before 2020 to get rid of AI. Yeah, it's valid. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Not too bad, and you?
I'm doing good. You said you used Blender to mock up something symmetric and accurate in terms of lighting, and then painted it from ref. Is this? At first I thought, did you not post the raw from Blender?
No, I never posted the 3D.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's.
I can post it if you want, but it looks similar.
Okay, I figured it probably looks similar to this. It's an approach I see being used quite extensively, and it's something that used to not be as accessible when I was first learning to paint because 3D software was all really expensive. There wasn't like a really good free alternative like with Blender, and so nowadays I see a lot of people using this earlier in their work process, but also it's much more common for 2D artists to use Blender as like a part of their creative pipeline. And I don't know. I think it's a good idea. But I did have a second.
Yeah.
I did have a second thought. I wanted to talk about the old school way of doing it really quick. And then get back to you. So the way I typically do mine is like the idea of like you have this asymmetrical view of a symmetrical object, and you want to be able to like make it look pretty good. The trick that I've always done is that I just draw everything on the forward side first. I'll do like a bunch of wobbly lines or whatever over here to get something that's about the right silhouette. Then I'll design everything to the forward side where we get to see the most of it. And then I'll go back and paint over all of the wobbly lines to use the left side as a reference image for the right side. And I will often get it wrong, but it'll be close enough where no one gets mad at me. So that I think is the old school approach to solving this problem. And I wanted to bring that up. All right.
Yeah, because I don't think that the way that it came out in the 3D view isn't necessarily what you'd expect looking at the other side. So it probably doesn't need to be that accurate.
Yeah, there's always a certain, when you have these really dynamic shapes like this, there's a certain amount of being surprised by it. And so even if you get it like pretty wrong, I'm sure you can point to a lot of examples of brilliant painters who have painted things asymmetrically. But I also saw like Platinum Fields did a crown design that was intentionally asymmetric, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, actually. So you could
Yeah,
theoretically just say, well, it's asymmetric on purpose, and no one could argue with you. So there's that too.
True.
All right. Tell me a little bit about your experience working on this past that point, though.
Past that point. So yeah, the first problem I had was the textures, but Jade had some tips for that, sorted that out.
Excellent.
As I said, I wanted to paint it. The metal took a while to figure out. I'm not sure I quite got it as well as you were saying with your critiques earlier on, having some dark parts next to the light. I definitely think I could have done that better in some of those
in
forward
some of the
facing.
brightest parts, just covering on this really quick. I think some of the darker parts, it looks very, very good. But in some of these brighter parts, like because you have this plane that is like changing direction very wildly,
I
and then
agree,
it's
yeah.
all like a single, like very similar value, I think it reads less shiny as a result of that. Well,
Yeah,
like
I
it's
agree.
fine if it's dark across the long length of it with a few breaks for highlights, but with shiny stuff, we always think that shiny means bright, but I think shiny actually means that there's long planes of
Means-
darkness broken by bands of light rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of that lighter area.
Hmm.
So I don't know if there's like a trade-off between the read,
Yeah.
the composition.
I think
but-
having the brighter area is good, and I think it's doable with a shiny material, but what you're going to be looking at is like a whole plane can be kind of filled with a highlight, but it also means that anything that turns from that plane is going to go pretty dark. So
Yeah.
something like
Yeah, I
this
agree.
might be fairly similar while still working similarly for the composition.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to beleaguer it. I think you did a very good job on the reflectivity. One of the things to spend some time praising you in this, you have the underside. I was talking about how the metallic objects are most exemplified by the fact that they're basically just a mirror image of stuff. You are showing that there's fire underneath it, and so you have a completely different like lighting for the underside where you're seeing the reflection of the red. And that is giving it a very reflective feel, especially when you have these darks and the yellows and the reds all in these tight spaces. This looks very reflective and very good. So I think contrasting the successes you're having here with some of the other parts where I think it looks less good, I think illustrates what makes a really good shiny material.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
All right.
The fire.
Fire. Let's beat you up on the fire a little bit. Okay. So the fire is that we're talking about, hey, there's all these different materials that you kind of need to like learn a language for. And fire is one of them. It's one of my favorites. I think I can more or less draw fire out of my head without reference at this point because it's sort of a cousin to clouds and smoke. I like drawing smoke. I like drawing curly smoke also because curly smoke is just made up of a bunch of wispy lines and stuff. So you take that and you kind of like overlap them into each other and make what you get with smoke and fire is you give like, let's say you draw like a overlapping curly lines. You can kind of just pick spots in them and like blend into them to make these kind of like see-through sheets, right? And so you just pick like an edge off of there and you extend it and let it blur out and you have it overlap itself and you have these sort of overlapping sheets of light and dark that kind of blend into each other like this. And you end up with that smoky, fiery material. And the more you wind it down in on itself and get like lots and lots of little curls, the more you can kind of get that like super smoky, like look where it's like a smoke that's being disturbed highly by the atmosphere. You get this very like chaotic looking smoke pattern. With fire, the forces acting on it are much stronger. So we end up with these big ribbons. So what I see in like this fire reference here is it's sort of like these big ribbons, and the ribbons like have like a glowing edge to them, and then they kind of build into themselves a little bit, where they become like the light. I want to say opaque, but it's just that there's so much light in it that it starts to become, it's see-through in some parts, but then these rhythm or ribbons, as they like kind of pass over themselves or they become thicker and thinner, sort of chaotically, they fill in parts, and they overlap with themselves a little bit, and so you end up with these bits that are kind of overlapping. But the overall material of it, you can see in the reference here that it tends to have it's really exemplified by these very sharp lines. This like sharp line that has a little bit of a dynamic weight to it. And you see these sharp lines throughout. So it's these like lots of these sharp little edges. And so I often just try to draw these out, draw the sharp little edges out, and then fill in the interiors of stuff. Because I think that they're a really key part of fire as a material, is these little thin wisps, and then everything else is just sort of like a thin film that's stretched between these like wires. And because it's like there's no right and wrong pattern of fire, fire can really take any shape. It really is just a matter of us finding the flow of where we want all of these little wires to run, and then building this like gossamer web of light that goes between them. So with that in mind, like this is, it looks like you are rendering the fire a little bit more like its hair, where we have like a highlight and then it's sort of spreading out from there. So you're using your knowledge about different materials and applying it over to this one, when really fire requires you to kind of go back to the root, start over from zero, which is a little frustrating. If you want to like shortcut your way over to it, one of the things you can do is it's very easy, like with shiny materials, fire is very easy to overdo it on the highlights. So if you grab like a dark saturated color, and you start going over the top of your own work in like with a big broad stroke to leave behind some like thinner, lighter gaps like this, you'll start to get a little bit of that fiery sense very quickly, because it's oftentimes these kind of odd shaped gaps, these dark gaps that go right through the middle of it, that end up like giving us a hint that we're looking at this chaotic fire shape and not something that has like a solid form, because it's got this ethereal quality where even though it's glowing, there are these dark holes that run right through the middle of it, right? And it's the dark holes that really like give us these immediate hints. Like the human brain is wired to recognize fire almost as instantaneously as to recognize a human face. And so you can sort of very quickly understand for yourself, like, okay, well, there's got to be something essential about this material that makes it read in such a snap way to me, because you've never mistaken fire for anything else in your whole life. It's just wired right into our brains. So if it feels like it's not quite right, you're not quite getting what you want, you gotta grab that reference and keep grinding at it until you can figure out like what pattern of strokes and what brush do you need to be able to get the effect that you're really looking for. One of the earlier pieces we were looking at, a Nanoboy was saying how he was using like a like smoke brush. Was it? Never mind. I might be getting it wrong. But the smoke brush for it, I personally think that my round brush is really good for this, because I think that the essential qualities of fire are these really thin marks, which I'm able to get from really thin, like really light strokes, and then filling in with this sort of gossamer sheet that goes between them, and that is just like low opacity, like high pressure strokes. And you can see how that's able to build up this lattice work of the flame, very like a rough approximation of it very quickly. So like with a lot of organic rendering, I think that this like thick, thin brush is actually the best option. When you start getting into like a campfire that has like smoke coming out of it, you might end up with a smoky brush. But I think that a lot of these like licking flame shapes, these are absolutely not a cloudy brush. They don't have soft edges to them at all. I love looking at fire like this. You can see how like tight and precise the curves of every one of these little flame licks are. And like, I just think that the motion, being able to see the motion of that, the energy of that, and the way it like winds around on itself and curls in all these unexpected ways, I think that that's just gorgeous to look at. And I think it's something that's fun to put in just about any painting that you can. For you, someone who really loves details and rendering, oh man, if you get a handle on fire, you are never going to pass on an excuse to draw it again. It's going to be one of your favorite materials to default back to. When it starts getting really dense, you can see how all these little lines start to become like this massive cobweb that now starts to feel a little bit more like clouds, but it has to get gigantic for it to start to feel like that. If we're looking at it on this scale, I think that these like smaller, tighter patterns are absolutely the key to unlocking flame. All right, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. The way you've described it there makes it seem a lot less complicated, like the thin lines and the kind of, as you said, like a film
Yeah,
that becomes more opaque closer to the edges. So that makes sense.
it's like when
I
you
definitely see how it's similar to clouds.
in Halloween decorations, what they have is there's like a bowl, and inside are a bunch of sheets of fabric, and there's a little fan underneath that blows them around. And so it's a bunch of sheets of fabric that are just blowing around in a bowl. And it looks, with a light underneath it, it looks like a good approximation of flame. And so that's really what I would make it more analogous to, is a series of gossamer sheets that are all kind of blowing around in the wind than, like hair or smoke or clouds. And so if you can get the motion of these little sheets, you are so close. I think fire is actually really easy to paint once you kind of wrap your head around it, because it's so flexible. Like it doesn't reflect or refract light at all. It's like completely emissive, meaning it generates its own light. So you don't actually even need to like respect the lighting of your own painting to be able to add it. It's like it looks perfectly well without any kind of context. It just, in order to be very clearly visible, it needs kind of a darker background is all.
Yeah. I think as I looked at those references there, I see that the way I painted that is, it's similar to some of the reference, but it's not the right type of fire, I guess, for this. And it's not the right shape design either, I think, for that, with the red and the yellow in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a different type or different shape. So
Well, you did get it right that
it wouldn't behave.
Fire does this peculiar thing where you would think that the brightest part of the fire would be where it's like coming out, right? Like if we're spraying fire out of a hose here, that the place where it's hottest and therefore brightest would be right where it's coming out. But where flames tend to generate, they do this weird thing where like if there's a log here, it's not going to be brightest at the base of the log. It's going to be like weirdly dark, and it's going to kind of sit above it. Like the fire tends to kind of sit above whatever object is burning to a degree. And it like, I think we can see that if we go to...
the picture of the match earlier showed that.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I was looking at. It was like a candle. I think I was looking at a candle.
Yeah, even on this torch here, you can see that the place where the fire's emanating from is actually dark, and like on a on like a match, you can see it actually, the place where it's emanating from is dark, and that it tends to be brightest. The bright part of it kind of sits and hangs above the base of the flame, which is a little counterintuitive, but I don't think it's hard to kind of figure out our way through it. And in this case, you can see the flame is actually, we can't see the whole flame. We only see the brightest piece of it. It seems to hang in the air above the base of the fuel. So I'm not sure the physical reasons why that happens, but it gives us a little bit of an insight into like where we put our emphasis for a flame is always going to be at a place where it's kind of worked itself up. It at the base of it, it always tends to be a little dark, and you've gotten that exactly right here, where the place where the flame is emanating from is dark and it's redder, and then it works its way up into a brighter part. It's a really good observation on your part.
I feel like in terms of the placement of the colors, I've gone for more of a candle-like flame.
Mm-hmm.
Then in terms of the shape design, it's a different type of flame. That might be the problem. Is that right?
Maybe. I think
Like
that,
I'm trying to show like a sorry.
yeah, like I think that this kind of like curvy back and forth fire thing isn't really a shape that fire tends to take. I think it's kind of a
Okay.
graphic pictorial shorthand for fire, but I don't actually think it's a very realistic depiction of it. Part of that is that I think we think about it kind of having this wide base, but we were just saying it like tends to be kind of invisible where it starts off. So it tends to have these kind of wisps or like looser parts towards the bottom, and then it thickens out and it gets brighter, and then it goes back up, and then it starts to dissipate again. I think that one of the great advantages of painting fire is it's an opportunity to shape it however you feel best fits the composition. So if you wanted to have this like bursting outwards, you could have flames that are, riding out away from the crown. If you wanted to like have them come together over the top, you could have them do that. You can choose a lot of different ways that you feel this is like best going to show an energy. It's like, I think there was one of the assignments where I asked everybody to paint the aura of the character. This is an opportunity to like create an aura for the object. So you can make that as big or as small, or, shape it in any direction that you want. What we're ultimately creating when we're often painting fantasy fire is an aura. And like it's an opportunity to show the forces that surround the object rather than focus on the fire itself. It's an excuse to show those forces.
Yeah. I agree. Okay.
Okay. Any questions or thoughts? We are over time, and I'm going to wrap up here right at the end.
Yeah, we're well over time now. I'm going to let you go. Thanks very much, Peter. I really
All right,
appreciate
thank
it.
you, Sean. It's great to see your work. I've been giving you these harsh crits because I like your work so much, and I think that you're always doing some good stuff. I want to say, Flo.
Thank you. I like your work too, Pete.
Okay. Thank you. Flo did a very, very nice design here. I'm way over time on this, and Flo wasn't around, so I'm sorry I didn't get a credit on your thing. I think that a lot of the stuff that I've talked about here today, you did a really great job on. I wanted to talk a little bit about your design process. I was kind of curious about what your thinking was. I noticed that you had perfectly matched the proportions of my piece, and you had also matched one of the design decisions I'd made, which is to make a break in the back of the crown. The reason I did that was because I felt like when I had it circling all the way around, it looked too much like a ring. And so the break in the back was really to see if I can help get crown shape out of it. But I wanted to hear about Flo's thoughts on the design in an effort to have a conversation about like, what do we feel like our expectations are when we're making something based on a brief? Like, where do we feel like we need to do what's in the brief versus where we need to do the work that we feel like we want for ourselves? And I have to admit at this part, I had actually changed the brief when I gave it to you guys. The original brief was for blue flame, which some of you did. Jade did. But I took that out because I had ultimately ignored it. I was like, I don't want to do blue flame. And so when whether it's a commercial project or a personal project, ignoring portions of the brief to shape the thing to your own imagination is always on the table. But when it comes to commercial illustration, oftentimes you get to communicate with the art director, or maybe you slip it in and do something that they didn't ask for, and then you get to find out whether or not they're going to go, oh, that looks better, or please change it to match the brief, and it's always very frustrating. But I personally like to default to saying everything in the brief is up in the air. It doesn't really matter what they thought they wanted. I'm going to do what I want. And I always want to encourage everybody to do that. And so that was one of the things I want to talk to Flo about was like, hey, always follow your own path when it comes to this stuff. Don't try to read unwritten rules. If anything, try to unwrite already written rules. Try to bend every written rule and then write your own on top of them. That's, I think, like the path of like the creative artist. So don't feel shy about that. All right, here's the image for this week. It's in the homework channel. I'm tossing it in the chat one more time. We have this handsome Italian man. This is an easy study. But what I want you to do is I want you to paint it in your style, as much in your style as your style can be. I want to see everybody interpret what they think their style is, and I'm curious about what everyone thinks the hallmarks of their style is and what choices they're making. Or maybe you come in and you go, I did the study, but I don't know what makes my style up, and I would love to give you guys feedback on what I think your style is and what the hallmarks of your work is, because I've gotten to know a number of you over the course of doing this, and I love to see the unique aspects of everyone's work. And I have a certain catalog in my head of what I think you're all good at and like what makes up what you do. And I wonder if it matches with your own self-conception a little bit. So maybe this is an interesting assignment. Maybe it's a boring one. We're about to find out next week. Thank you all for joining me. Thanks for putting up with me being overtime again. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good one. Goodbye.